What's up, everybody? This is Jeff Moore, currently serving as the CEO of ICE. And before we jump into today's episode, let me take a moment to introduce Jane, the clinic management software and EMR that so many of us in the ICE community use in practice. Change is a normal part of clinic life. Maybe you're expanding your team, introducing new offerings, or growing your client list. As your clinic evolves, it's important to have an EMR that not only supports those changes, but also grows with you. Jane's new Balance, Practice, and Thrive pricing plans offer flexibility, allowing you to easily switch from one plan to another depending on your current and future needs. There's no long-term commitment either, just simple month-to-month payments that let you focus on running your clinic. And with every plan, you get features like one-on-one telehealth, email appointment reminders, and unlimited support. Visit jane.app/pricing to find a plan that fits your needs starting at $39 a month here in the US. And when you're ready to get started, use the code ICEPT1MO to sign up for a 1-month grace period on your new account. Thank you so much and enjoy the show. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast. I've got Cody Gingerich with us this afternoon, and Cody is a number of things. He's lead faculty over on the Institute of Clinical Excellence, Extremity management side of things. So teaching out there on the road very, very steadily throughout the year. He's also co-owner of Onward Greenville with his wife, Jess. They've got a bunch of locations now. Cody's at 4?
4 in September.
Yeah, 4 in September. So they've really surrounded that Greenville, South Carolina area with a whole host of clinicians, working with fitness athletes of all types. Started off in Hampton Station and now have spread to Greer and again around the city, really covered that area. So Cody brings a wealth of knowledge from a teaching standpoint, from a clinical practice standpoint. How many years in practice, Cody?
18 to now. Was that 7, 8?
Dude, you're pushing a decade here.
7, 8, yeah.
Yeah, in both settings, in network and out of network. Yep. So going to be awesome to chat with Cody about all things practice, teaching, running a business, kind of what he finds to be the secret sauce, all sorts of stuff to jump into. Before we do, Cody, we always start with a random question, and that one is, what was the biggest disagreement that you and Jess had on setting up the clinic? What was something she wanted? Where did you guys, it's always hard to figure out the subtleties of a clinical space. I'm curious, with two strong personalities, what was one of the things you were like really going head to head on?
Well, now I'm the painter of everything.
Yeah.
And so the current clinic that we have, the first one, has ceilings that are 15 feet high.
Yeah, they're way up there.
They're big. Yeah. And our first thought was we wanted not everything to be black. So I painted 3 of the walls white. We had some black. And almost immediately after it was done, she was like, those need to be all black. And I was like,
in other words, get the paintbrush back out.
Ladder, because when I first painted it, I had a scissor lift, so I could get up there easily. Well, then I didn't have that anymore, so now it's every time I need to get up there, it's move the ladder, shift over, all of this.
Yeah,
and so I was like, it's okay for now. But
are they still white?
They are still white.
Okay.
I painted some other smaller things, but we're about to do a full clinic revamp. Okay. So we've been there for 4 years now. So 4 years later, I'm now willing to, we're going to.
That's a very reasonable compromise.
We're going to do it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Why are you going darker? Why the change?
We weren't sure how lighting and everything would be, but we have a really nice bay door that lets in a ton of natural light.
Yeah.
At first, we thought it would feel a little too dungeony because there's not really any other windows other than that bay door. So we were like, if it goes too dark, it'll just look like a cave. And we're realizing now, after having a couple other clinics that we went a little darker on, that it'll look really nice and not feel that way if we go dark.
Love it. So Cody, talk to me a bit about your day-to-day now, because you're sitting in an interesting position. I mean, first of all, you're traveling a lot for weekend courses. You're managing these clinics and mentoring all these clinicians, but you're still practicing. Just so we kind of have an understanding of like what a Tuesday or Wednesday looks for. What are you doing? How are you spreading your time across all these responsibilities?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on the day. Tuesday and Wednesday, I start coaching at one HIT studio at 5 in the morning. And then I treat patients all day until about 5 or 6 p.m.
The class starts at 5?
Yes.
Ooh.
And then that's my full clinical day.
Yeah.
Wednesday, then I start and I coach at the CrossFit gym at 5 in the morning, treat patients until noon, and then I'd go to Greer, which is about 30 minutes away, and do clinical stuff and or just hang out with Ryan, who is over at that clinic full time. And then Thursday I take the morning off and do mentorship and whatever needs to be done business wise in the morning, treat in the afternoon. Friday is usually whatever needs to be. Usually I treat a little bit in the morning, travel if I need to, that type of thing.
Okay.
So it's a mix of, I have very blocked spaces specifically now for talking to PTs that we have with us and or business stuff, mentorship, etc.
How long did it take to where you had those organized blocks? For how long was it kind of just randomly trying to do everything?
Probably the better part of last year.
Yeah.
So that shift happened. We brought on 3 new people in February, March of this year.
Yeah.
So that was when before it was kind of like, hey, like if you need me, like block his time on my schedule. And we would do that and it would be random as far as mentorship. And now it's like, hey, every week I have this time and this is when we're going to do it.
Talk about how much. So one of the most popular questions we get, because you're onboarding a variety of experience levels into a totally cash-based out-of-network setup, which from a patient expectation side can be challenging because the expectations are really high. People always want to know how much mentorship do new clinicians need? And new clinicians always want to know, like, when I'm going to look for one of these jobs, if they're actually going to get me good, how much should I be asking for? What should my expectation be? You've now dabbled with this for years. Mm-hmm. What's the right dosage? How much time do you put aside for each clinician to work on skill development?
Is this a new physical therapist or new clinician to onward?
Tell us both because they're such important answers, but they're different answers. So give us both since you have both.
Yeah. So new clinician, we'll start there. So far,
someone fresh out of school, new grad.
Yes.
Okay.
So far we've hired 2 people fresh out of school.
Yep.
Both of those people though did a clinical rotation with us for a minimum of 3 months.
Okay.
Michaela, who works with us now, did 6 months with us before she graduated.
Okay. That's a huge variable.
Huge variable.
Yeah.
So for them, they saw exactly for 3 months how we needed to do things, language. We would do all of the clinical stuff that we needed to day to day for 3 or 6 months.
Yep.
So for them, we start everybody at once a week. We're going to have at least an hour once a week.
Okay.
No matter what.
Yep.
What that looks like is a little different for those 2 because they kind of had some of the clinical reasoning stuff because we've been doing that every day.
Yeah.
So then the shift was more marketing. Who can we get you in front of? What are the action steps that you can do to build your caseload?
Yeah.
And so that's, if we were to hire on a new grad who we need everyone to at least have some idea of like ICE principles.
Yeah.
And so whether they've taken a course or something, understand those first few months of every week might be more clinical, pattern based. Here's how we talk. Here's how we treat. Here's how all of these things.
Yep.
But it's going to be once a week.
Yep.
New to onward, that looks much more clinical, heavy up front of what does your previous experience of, we've hired everyone who's been in and out of network place already, or travel PT or whatever, where primarily older adults, your typical kind of like turn and burn type of clinics, a lot of post-op, all of that, where you can kind of rinse and repeat a lot, and your test retest and your hour with a patient of like, what does this look like from actually walking in the door, getting those subjective asterisks? What does your hour of time look like? And how are you spending that? Are we doing more manual heavy stuff, or are we doing more exercise based stuff? And usually it shifts a little bit more towards manual therapy in a room, plus developing a plan for that person, because they're not coming 2 or 3 times a week anymore.
Yeah.
They're coming maybe weekly for a few weeks and then spaced out more.
You don't have to answer this question if it's too sensitive of a question, but you've done both. And I'm sure a lot of cash-based clinic owners, their ears are perked up right now out of curiosity. Someone who is new to the profession, doesn't have a lot of reps, is green, but also doesn't have a lot of habits that you have to unwind, versus someone who's been in more of a high volume clinic, much more comfortable with the overall idea of seeing people and doing the thing, but a lot of habits that don't really fit in our model. Is one of these people easier to get to the sweet spot of where they really thrive in an onward, or is it really just different that you're working on different stuff?
We spend a lot of time talking to people before we actually hire them.
Okay.
And so I ask, and Jess does a great job of this too. We ask a lot of those questions basically on how willing are you to kind of let go of what has been.
How tied to what you were doing are you?
I want to know kind of how you are currently treating. What do you want to bring all of your skill set into onward and do exactly what you have been doing? Or are you open to a potentially new type of thinking?
Yeah.
And we ask those questions. And if people are like, this is sensitive. People who are OCS on the resume and or maybe fellowship trained even, it is not as big of a plus in my mind as people might think it,
because they have a lot of sunken cost into what they've done. Letting go of it's harder. It just makes sense.
And it could be that, hey, I love to learn new things.
Yeah.
And that is why they have pursued those things.
Yeah.
And so if that is the way that it is, I love it.
Yep.
If it is, well, this is the way that I know how to do it because I have this training.
Yeah.
Different conversation.
That's interesting. So a lot of it comes down to, are they adaptable? Maybe not quite so important what's your absolute amount of experience, but are you somebody who's looking to adopt and excited to adopt the new way of thinking and practicing?
And the thing that I like to, I don't want to necessarily mold a bunch of clones of myself either.
Yeah.
And there are thought processes and exercises and other things that people have their own experience that they can bring in as long as the bones are there. And so in that sense, I don't mind bringing somebody in who has some experience that's like, hey, I know that I haven't been like as dialed as I could be in this other setting, but they've got still like some clinical patterns that they've seen and some different things. Like, I love that.
Yep.
And then they can mesh all of that stuff together, and that becomes a weapon too.
Yeah.
So some of the new grads, it's like, hey, here's how we do things. And then they have a harder time or broadening that viewpoint.
Anything outside of that circle. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about those bones, because that's really where I want to go with this conversation, because it was interesting. I chatted with you before we hopped on here in talking about getting people into a new way of thinking, or one that's more conducive to our way of having success, like patients seeing the value. Again, when they're paying 150, 175 bucks, like they have to be like, I'm getting a ton out of this. The days of going through the motions, rinsing and repeating, these are high volume, high reimbursement days that are long gone. And what you said surprised me, because it wasn't so much necessarily about what they did, but more so about the volume of it, meaning that maybe the preconceived notion of doing more is not necessarily valuable. And I guess, can you talk a little bit about where you've gone with your practice and what got you thinking into that space?
Yeah. The further that I get into, it's been 4 years now that I've been in this out of network.
Yep.
And I shifted from a high volume clinic straight into that. So one of the biggest things is, when I first started this out of network, I was very acutely aware of how much people were paying me, and I needed to give them everything that I possibly could to make them feel like this $150, $175 was worth their time coming in. And I was acutely aware of that for the better part of probably 2 years.
Yeah.
And through that time, what I realized was that it wasn't so much like some of these people, we would just chat for 30 minutes and I'd be looking at the clock and I'd be like, what? Like, we haven't done anything.
I got to
yet.
give you
like
something.
we got to get moving here, because like our time's going to come up. I got somebody else coming in
Yeah.
and like what's been happening. But those 30 minutes, it wasn't just like, talking about nothing. It was talking about what they're going through, what they've been doing over the last week or two, like what drives them on a day-to-day basis, what stressors do they have in their life? Like all of these things are coming up in that conversation. So, and sometimes they're leading that conversation. And I'm just there to facilitate and ask follow-up questions. And that, while at the back of my brain, I'm like, how is this kind of impacting what they're here to see me for?
Yeah.
And then we get to the end and I'm like, hey, I really think that we need to just get a really solid plan in place for you.
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to be, I could turn your pain down from a 4 to a 1 or 2 today, but also like that would not allow us to have a ton of time to like set you up for success over the next week to 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And instead it's, let's get this whiteboard out. Here's what you've been doing. Let's talk about that. Mm-hmm. And why is this thing impacting what's going on? And instead, let's shift into this, knowing all of that other 30 minutes of dialogue is valuable to them because they're sharing all of that with you.
They're looking to share it. Yeah.
Right. And so then it's like, okay, we have this plan in place now. Let's go and make sure, I want my eyeballs on you to do a few reps of these things. Let's make sure that whatever exercises that I'm choosing, the dosage is right, the form is correct, all of that stuff. And they walk out and they have this really concrete plan where it's like, I can go and execute this at a high level. And those people, you can tell they walk out with like a wave of emotion just left their body of just like, I feel like I have something to like hold on to now.
Yeah.
And that shift was significant because I felt like at the end of that at times, I was like, man, what did we really do today?
Yeah.
But they're thanking me multiple times walking out the clinic and stoked to come back in 2 or 3 weeks to show what, okay, I've done this. I did this plan exactly right. Here's where I felt from it. And I was able to do this. And then that next visit comes in and they're super pumped to tell you all of that and to get the next plan.
It's so hard because when you come out of school, first of all, you feel the need to do every single physical exam item in the world. So your objective is massive. When you're billing units, you need to be doing things to be able to bill these units. Mm-hmm. It's a general, I think, kind of assumption in society that more is better. So all of these things are sort of leading to more. Mm-hmm. And your argument is, at least that you've transitioned to, away from that and steadily towards less. I don't want to say less and less and less, but I do want to say fewer things, maybe done better.
Yep.
Was there a moment in your practice, was there any sort of like a eureka moment where you're like, dude, I'm going to start doing way less? Or has it been a gradual titrating towards concentrating value?
I think it's been more gradual, and it's gotten better with being better at physical therapy.
Okay.
So doing the model that is, we are subjective asterisk signs when they walk in the door, getting that done and figuring out irritability and making sure have a very acute understanding of this patient's irritability every single time they walk in the door. And then having all of these clinical pattern recognitions from doing the body chart at a high level and having years of that to where now when these people are coming in, I don't have to think, my brain capacity does that naturally. And so now my brain capacity is connecting with the human in front of me because I don't have to think about what question do I need to ask next in order to get my irritability dialed in.
Yeah.
It is much more, I am hearing what that person is saying and reacting to their emotions and their psychology so that then I can play into all of that. So the better I got there over the years, the easier that second part became.
It's tough because, like you said, when students are watching or new clinicians are like, well, dude, you're not doing much. It seems like you're not doing a whole lot. But that's because at one point you did a whole lot.
A lot.
And it's awfully hard to shortcut that. You know, it's like how the master makes something look so simple and you're like, oh, I could knock that out. You know? And then you realize that simplicity could only have come from years of complexity.
Yep.
How do you mentor that? When your therapists are seeing that, I guess, do you just accept the fact that you have to go through a phase where you are doing more things than one day you will?
I mean, yeah, there's absolutely, and that's where some of the new people that are coming on board is I'm okay with their effort needs to be spent on the body chart.
Yeah.
And making sure that they're getting that irritability really clean and making sure that they're finding the thing that needs to be treated.
Yep.
Because that has to be primary thing number one.
Totally.
And so we're going through case studies. Like this is a week over week thing of saying, how could we have improved this part of it?
Yeah.
And sometimes it is, you might have just done too much and you got too much in the weeds and you don't actually know where you're headed.
Yeah.
And that's not, you have to do less. That's, you need to be better at the body chart and all of that. And so that's years of figuring that out first.
Yeah.
And I kind of attribute it to, if you played sports growing up and like every time you level up into the next, you move from like a freshman team into a JV team into a varsity team.
Yeah.
The speed at which those games are played, like playing basketball. My freshman year, I bounced between like a JV and varsity. I played JV, but I practiced with the varsity team because they needed a few extra bodies.
Yeah.
And the speed at which those games were played is very different. Mm-hmm. And I was a bit of a fish out of water on the varsity team, but as that year progressed, then the JV games became much slower. Mm. But it took a while for that to happen.
Yeah.
And it was just like I was just drowning up top, and then I was fine there, but I wasn't necessarily like thriving.
Totally.
But as I wasn't no longer like trying to just tread water, I was now participating varsity and doing okay at it.
Yep.
JV became easy.
Yeah.
And I feel that the same way of like, you're going to be kind of trying to tread water on some of these other like smaller things for a while.
Yeah.
And you're pretty good at doing the body chart, but there's still a lot to learn there. But then as that starts to slow down, everything else becomes easy.
I love that. And I think it's a switch of where the more is. Like the game changes, you know, like at first you're trying to do all the things, but then if you start looking at it of what do I need, what burden of proof do I need to surround an intervention to make someone truly believe it's valuable, you begin to realize I can't do much more than one or two things. Like if I'm going to convince this patient that the thing we're doing is addressing their actual problem and they're going to believe me, there's going to be quite a bit of subjective there. There's going to be there's a lot of conversation just right there. If we're then going to show that it made a difference, we have to have pre-testing and post-testing. If we then believe that progressing is going to be relative to their performance goal. If you think about the burden of proof around any single thing you're going to do for them to really latch into it, that's where the more I think belongs. Fewer things, more proof. You know?
Which, and it might be like, don't become bored yourself of doing the same treatment that has been working and you have proven to them and yourself that it's working.
Right.
Because
you went through all that to make that case.
Yes.
Ride the horse.
Yes.
You know?
Don't be afraid to spend 15 or 20 minutes on this one manual technique that you know is going to be valuable.
Yeah.
Or to say, that exercise was perfect for you. Instead of using 2 pounds, we're going to use 3 pounds.
Yep.
Like, it's working. Just ride it.
It's just so interesting when I watch, because now I watch onward clinicians of a wide variety of years of experience. And it's so funny to watch the difference. Like when you watch the veteran who's been doing it 4 or 5 years in this environment, that's very important. So different in structure. They seem to be sitting there talking forever because that's the proof. That's the emotional proof. That's getting to the goal. It's making damn sure you know what you're trying to do. The most valuable thing. Then their exam is very brief because this was so robust. We know exactly what we're looking at and why, and we don't look at anything else. And then the interventions are even briefer. It's sometimes it's like this tight, that pyramid, if you will, is literally flipped on the novice.
For sure.
You see this quick subjective, and then holy man, are we testing a lot of stuff? In holy man, are we doing a lot of stuff? And nobody's buying it, clinician or patient.
Yes. Yeah, subjective is so valuable of just like, hey, walk me through your day. What is this? I mean, there's so much value to, especially when you start getting into like, oh man, it feels a little weird. Like, why is this thing not working? I felt like I found the thing.
Yeah.
There's so much value to be gained from just digging into someone's life, because they're going to start talking to you about like the interventions that they did and the gym exercises that they did that week or whatever.
Yeah.
But there's so much more life that happens that can be irritating tissues.
Yeah.
That you can't just be like, oh, well, what did you do at the gym? Like, I wonder if that like shoulder press for, last week you did 65 pounds. This week you tried 75. So that was probably the tipper. It's like, no. Like there was something else that happened. Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
And then like, let's have it. And that allows a patient to have an understanding of like, oh, okay, well, I do see how that could have, been more than what I was prepared for.
Yeah.
And I need to be a little bit more aware of some of those extrinsic factors throughout their day. But if you don't spend some time like chatting about it and they're like, oh yeah, I'm a little flared up today. Oh, what did you? Well, we had some pull-ups at the gym. It's like, okay. And then you move on. You're not going to get it.
Yeah. Yeah, early on, you're so sure that, it was something physical. It's a physical problem. When like you're in reality, like you said, there's so many lifestyle factors that play into someone's resilience. And you even mentioned one of the most important things that you do intervention-wise is permission. And that all lives in the subjective. Like someone did some research or they're worried about, your biggest intervention might be talking, which seems wild to a lot of people who are in the more traditional model, that your number one intervention that day might literally be confirming their beliefs or, helping to focus those things.
There is not one singular thing that I say that gets a more relief feeling out of patients than when I say, I do think that some of those rotator cuff muscles are a little irritated, but what I'm really confident in is that there's no big tears. And there's no reason for you at all to have any surgery. Because almost everybody, if they hear the word rotator cuff, they know somebody.
They're picturing that slang.
100%.
Yeah.
And someone in there, and if someone says like, oh, my shoulder hurts, someone around them has probably had a rotator cuff surgery, a slap tear.
Yep.
And by me just saying, I am very confident that there is no major tear here. There's no reason for you to even think about a surgery at this point. And just, you can feel it and see it immediately. And they're like, oh, okay, so then what do I do? It's like, I'm glad you asked. Here's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
We're gonna get those rotator cuff muscles. There's a handful of them. And all it is just a little irritation there. Let's get some blood flow, get them a little stronger.
Yeah. But again, you can't identify that ping point if the subjective isn't thorough enough.
Right.
If you go in and ask about, hey, what happened in the gym? And you don't talk about, hey, what have you been looking at? What do you think it is? You're never going to identify. They need you to hear, hey, it's not that.
Especially now with AI, I've had multiple.
How
people.
has that changed things?
Interesting. It's interesting. And to its credit, I've had some people be like, I typed this thing into ChatGPT and here's what it spit out, and I look at it and be like, okay, like. It gives them a bunch of stuff to where it's overwhelming, kind of similar to if they just Googled it or like tried everything that they saw on Instagram.
Yeah.
But most of the time it's like things that could eventually work.
Yeah.
It would just take a long time and be frustrating because they're trying 45 minutes of PT exercises.
Totally.
But a lot of people are doing it and they're coming in and they're seeing like, oh, it says it could be, biceps tendinopathy, or it could be a slap tear, or in ChatGPT is kind of walking them through what that looks like. And then, if you have a certain thing, it's saying surgical intervention or conservative management, and it's people are doing it, and you have to now. It's more potent than what people used to be Googling because they're getting a lot more information.
And it's like bringing them to the next question.
Yes.
Like, I mean, this flow, this algorithmic flow,
Yeah.
Google MD was one thing, but this is a whole different layer of depth.
Yes. Yes.
Dude, that's interesting. So, I mean, I've never experienced that with a patient. Dude, I'm going to start playing around. I'm infinitely curious now where that brings you.
I would say the last 4 to 5 months, it's been a pretty significant uptick.
Yeah.
And people saying that they have messed on ChatGPT with whatever they've got going on.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
That's going to be fun to track that. Cody, I want to be, just because you spend so much time in the exercise prescription space, teaching wise, and in the clinic, you've got so much experience. When we do now talk about interventions, when I asked you what are some of the key things you're doing that kind of separate your ability to get these folks better, keep things simple, and make big changes, one of the things you mentioned was tempo training, and nobody's ever responded to that question that way to me. So I'd love for you to share some insight with the group on how did you wind up on spending so much focus on that? Why do you think it gives you so many gains? Why is it a big miss that it's not happening in a lot of clinics?
Yeah. We feel super strongly in the Extremity team. Our first lecture of the day is dosage.
Yeah.
And we feel like nothing else matters if you don't have your dosage dialed in. Yeah. And that includes like making sure that you are hitting the right tissues and giving them the appropriate stimulus necessary to make changes.
Yep.
What I have found clinically over the last several years is tempo can bring out a lot of workarounds that people are doing, especially if they're involved in a group fitness class. Most group fitness classes are pretty high intensity to some capacity.
Yeah.
It is do this movement this many times with this clock on you, and you need to move through it quickly.
Yep.
Typically there's a coach around, but they can't see every single person. And if you move moderately well, you're probably not going to get, anything coming at you as far as fixing that.
Yep.
And a lot of times if you're squatting or you're pressing and you just hit the bottom of that squat and bounce up, there's not much to be seen. But what most of those classes also do is you're working bilaterally most of the time. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of hip hinge type of movements in the sagittal plane. And when people come in then with overuse injuries, it was a lot of unilateral discrepancies in strength and or mobility that they didn't really even know they had. It was just a pain point.
Yeah.
And if I started having people go, okay, I want you to tempo this squat down 5 seconds at a time.
We talk like have a metronome out and like, hey, take it easy.
Yes. And I'm saying I want to watch you move and I want it to be as symmetrical as possible. All of a sudden they start feeling like, oh, I feel like I'm sitting heavier into my right side on the way down. And I'm having to actually work hard to maintain this symmetry. And then on the way up, it's the same thing. It's like, ooh, I want to kind of push off of that right side a little bit more to get out of the bottom of that hole.
Yeah.
But they're not noticing that if they just
are finding a way and hammering it out.
Down and up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same thing when with pressing. If I say, okay, I want you to press relatively slow under tempo or come down, you might see one elbow kind of kick one direction or the other. Same thing with a pull up. If we're pulling and you might see a little head shift one way or the other.
Just favoring a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
And they feel that when you have them slow that down. So number one, it can be a diagnostic tool of, okay, your right side is taking on a big, heavy brunt of this work. And it doesn't always mean that the right side is the painful side. It could mean that the left side is not getting enough stimulus and we have a tendinopathy developing, or the right side could be, you can't assume, oh, you have right-sided pain. So you still have to do all of the things you need to do for sure. But diagnostically, you can see, okay, we have something going on here that you're working around. We got to figure out why that's happening.
And they can see it and feel it.
They can see it and feel it. So one of the biggest things, I love getting feedback of, I want you to tell me what you're feeling, what's working hard here. Like, where do you feel like this stimulus is happening? Are you feeling this quad heavy, hamstrings, hips, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
Most of the time people can give you a pretty good understanding of what that is.
Yeah.
And then you go through treatment and you come back and you work through that and you go through that full tempo. Oh, I feel like I can more comfortably work down. I'm not having to fight myself quite as much, whether it's a mobility thing or strength, or you just kind of woke something up, whatever. And that's been super valuable. And then you make them do that for a long time. Like if they're going to the gym, it's like you can't really be trusted to not feed this problem for a while.
Yeah.
And have them, or it's like maybe they need to start, the first set has to be very, very slow. And then their brain can kind of be like, okay, this is the right way to do it. And then it'll feed into what they need to if it wasn't something major. So the tempo thing is massive.
Dude, I love that, because you always think about, when you're starting a new cycle or whatever, a lot of your early gains are neuromuscular, right? Like what a spot for neuromuscular gains. Just the awareness and making your brain be like, dude, I'm not firing. I can't imagine. You probably get a big jump even without having to get stronger, just by relearning.
For sure. For sure. And it's this hard thing of like, we don't want to use language of like, oh, this is asleep or whatever. But if it's like, hey, my brain hasn't figured out exactly like when that thing needs to be working at its highest capacity.
Yeah.
We just facilitate that a little bit.
Well, and it's just interesting because so much of the past 10, 15 years of hype and exercise has been around high intensity training, which has so many positives. But one downside, especially when you're competing with your buddies, is you're trying to rip out those reps. There's no penalty for using your right arm a little more than your left, as long as it lands up there.
And the body is incredible at taking the path of least resistance.
Totally.
Incredible. I mean, I've seen some incredible athletes where, you dive into some mobility stuff and you're like, how have you been even making this happen? They're like, I mean,
found a way.
Yeah, it's all right.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, cool. But
yeah,
it's probably going to keep, getting worse if we don't address it at some point.
And what I would love, I'm sure obviously tendinopathies and localizing these loading capacity issues that's going to be a massive benefit to those individuals, but also for performance.
Oh yeah.
If you're 20% down on one side, like you might find a way, but dude, you could find a way with a lot more weight on the bar if we were all guns blazing,
Yep. And then doing those same types of things, then you have them do a box step down or something, or some single unilateral type of movements, and it becomes even more glaring. To where it's like, okay, you can see shifts, you can see all kinds of stuff from slowing some things down, making them feel what's happening.
Yeah.
Isometrics, I include isometrics in tempo as well, and I think
like down on the bottom, like hanging out. In the areas where it needs to be.
Yeah, and that's when you start seeing a lot of like muscular like juddering and like all kinds of stuff. And you can, because this is another way of proof to the patients. We talked about that earlier. It's like we need to do some things to prove that what it is we're going after is the appropriate thing.
Yeah.
And there's no better way than to just expose somebody incredibly well with some isometrics.
And they're just falling apart.
Yeah.
Just to give the listeners who want to use this clinically, kind of that one final step. So like, what is a very specific condition? We're speaking about tendinopathy. Maybe give us a specific one. What movement you would do this with? And then very specifically, what might the actual home program look like? So you mentioned when they go to the gym or whatever, like just so people actually like close the loop of, is it every day? Is it how many reps and sets? Like maybe walk us through one condition.
Sure. Let's do like a lateral hip tendinopathy.
Okay. Glute med kind of thing.
Med tendinopathy.
Yep.
Because of the volume of hinging that tends to happen, and squatting and all of those things that happen in group fitness classes, where we end up after you do testing, you see like, okay, there is a shift or a side that they gravitate to that is working harder than the other.
Yep.
You do some muscular testing and you see that discrepancy happen as well. So we'll just say it's a left hip needs some addressing.
Yep.
For that specific thing, we are going to go, depending on irritability.
Yep.
I want to potentially, if irritability is more high, we're going to be in a more neutral position, slightly abducted. So think like a side plank.
Okay.
To where we're not adding any compression. We're not really even getting into that hinge pattern quite yet.
Okay.
Once we get out of that, so that would be your 5x45, hitting that right before they
5 reps of 45
5
seconds.
sets, 45 seconds.
Yep. How long in between those?
About 90 seconds.
Okay. Yep.
So 1 to 2.
1 to 2.
Yes.
Yep.
From there, depending again on irritability, they could probably get away with they're doing that before they do their class.
Okay.
Calm some pain down, get there
10 minutes early.
Yep.
Knock this out.
Get that neuromuscular facilitation happening.
Yep.
So they have that brain is kind of connected of like, then there's some education on you need to like when these movements show up, you might need to pause a tiny bit. Maybe you, instead of doing 10 reps, you do 8, a tiny bit slower so you can focus on, I need to make that left hip do its job.
Yeah.
And I'm not working away from it.
Yeah.
Let's say they're not as highly irritable and we can push that envelope a little bit and we don't need to keep them in more of that neutral position, abduction.
Yep.
A step down, a single leg step down, and or a single leg like kickstand hinge of some capacity.
Okay.
Whether we are having our foot planted on a wall or doing just a kickstand RDL.
Yep.
Those would be my next 2 favorite things.
Okay.
What you have to watch out for is when they go back into that hinge, almost every time they're going to want to shift towards that side.
Yep.
To get their
Foot right under center of mass,
their lateral hip out of the equation.
Yep.
And so you need to either post them up against a wall, a rig, something. Yeah. I love external cues for like making things bulletproof.
Yeah.
And so
you can't cheat a wall.
You can't cheat a wall. You can't cheat. If you have them stand next to a rig to where you are 1 inch as they hinge back, if they shift at all,
boom,
into that side, they're hitting the rig and they can't get away from it.
Yep.
So I love those things.
Yeah.
And we are going 3 to 5 seconds all the way back. We are pushing that hip back as far as you can possibly go.
Yep.
Hold 3 to 5 seconds.
Yeah.
And then the first movement out of that hinge position has to be the hip comes forward. It is not the shoulders come up. It is not the knee goes forward.
Yep.
It is the hip comes forward.
Yeah.
That right there will ruin people's lives. Like, I mean,
for sure.
They have never done that in the last several years of their training.
And they might do how many reps of this in a given set?
If we're going 3 seconds,
3 down, we're pausing.
3 seconds back to make sure that we are not getting that shift. 3 second hold there at that spot, and then driving back forward. I'm going to want 8 to 10 reps of that.
Okay. All in a row, like have them come up, take a breath, and we're sending it right back again. Yep. But load is relatively low, but focus of movement is very, very high.
Very, very high.
Before the exercise again, are they going to the gym, taking a minute?
Yep.
Turning stuff on, getting things activated.
Yep.
Getting ready to roll.
Yep. And I would have them do 3 sets of that.
Yeah. I love that. I think I never see that in the clinic. And it kind of goes back to our first conversation where like, if you're going to put that attention to detail and we're going to go that slow and we're going to set it up that perfectly and they're not going to be able to compensate and you can't do 6 of those things.
No.
You have to be deciding this is it.
Yep.
Doing less better and spending a lot of time on a very small number of valuable things.
Yeah. And you have to watch them.
For
Every
sure.
single rep has to be like, if you are going to take the time to be that detailed on it, you cannot be typing notes while this happens.
Dude, for sure.
Like you could give them that exact same exercise, the exact same prescription. And if you haven't made sure that that is going that way, they could spend 2 weeks doing something that's not helping.
Dude, and I hope that's what the people listening to this podcast hear. Like the whole episode building to that the value they're going to perceive is in your attention, is in that detail, is in the actual result, is in the focus and lack of confusion of 9 things. It's in the concentration, of all of those things together. It's not more of those things. It's the right thing dosed with that level of vigor.
And they can feel that. And if
No
they
doubt.
have, that would take them 5 minutes. but a very specific and very attentional focused 5 minutes.
And they would know during it, dude, we're doing something that I should be doing more of.
Yes.
Like this.
And if someone tells you that they can't get that accomplished, like that, you have set them up for success, because you're not telling them to do 20 minutes twice a day of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, you build it into their life, but it is a serious dosage and stimulus for those 5 minutes.
I love it. Advocating more tempo work. Is this in the Ice Physio Extremity course? Are you all covering this upper or lower body? Where does that build into the class?
Yeah, we talk about it quite a bit in the upper extremity, a bunch with we have a rotator cuff, like sideline trio focus. Yeah. And so with that, and then in the lower extremity, when we're talking about Achilles tendinopathy, we touch on that too, as far as heel raises and making sure that people are adhering to that. And on the flip side, you can use tempo, faster tempo, to when we're talking about Achilles or tendinopathies.
Yeah.
Eventually, those things need to happen
pick up speed
at a rapider pace, more rapid pace. And so now we've gone from everything slow and controlled. Once you have that dialed in, okay, now let's go and see what that high intensity now can tolerate.
And there's something that's not taught very often.
Yeah.
I remember Steve Short, a good buddy of mine, he's the PT for the Denver Nuggets, but he had asked me, we were doing rehab on tendinopathy, and he had asked me, he's like, okay, when are we going to start toying around with speed? Mm-hmm. And I was like, you know, like that was pretty, I mean, I had thought about how heavy, how many reps, even work to rest ratio. What I hadn't thought about was the variable of speed, you know, but he was so in that world. He's like, well, dude, we can make it, you know, non-irritable or strong, but if they can't handle rapid change of, and I was like, dude, this is an entirely different space.
Yeah.
You know,
and that's, you've got to touch that. One, from, I mean, the tendon has to be able to tolerate that, or the tissue has to be able to tolerate it. And two, patient psyche has to, like, if you're saying
confidence,
if you're saying, hey, cool, like, you can do this really slow and controlled, but then they get into a group fitness class and the coach is saying, like, oh, let's go. And then they're like, the only way I feel safe right now is if I really concentrate on doing this perfectly. That's not going to hit a stimulus for fitness either.
Totally.
And that has to be addressed.
Yeah. And you wonder, you know, why hamstrings are so chronically, you know, a struggle for people as far as re-injuries. Well, think about when you're sprinting, how fast that thing decelerates and re-accelerates. I mean, there's a speed component that people just, once someone is fine doing normal things, we let it go.
Yes. So when you're trying to find the thing, slow tempo. Once you've found the thing and you have reorganized their movement patterns, give them then the freedom and force speed to challenge that.
Yeah. I love that. And it really does come down to, you've got to have time in a concentrated, quiet environment with you and that patient where these things can be done diligently. I think in so many settings that's missing. Mm-hmm. Your subtleties you're talking about, an inch away from the rig, leading with that. Like, dude, like you said, you cannot be rocking notes or, you know, grabbing someone else's soda. Like, I mean, you really got to be right there. It's why I'm excited. You're seeing so many different clinics open up that's the focus. And I think it's an exciting new era of PT when we're giving, I think it'll change the brand. You know, people will perceive it differently.
For sure.
Well, dude, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Where can folks find you if they want to connect, if they have any follow-up questions, if they want to engage in the courses? Where do they go?
My Instagram is cody.gingerich and I have that pretty regularly, DMs, whatever, check the requests. Our business at Onward Greenville is also very easy. I've got access to that as well. My email is cody@onwardgreenville.com.
I love it, dude. Thank you so much for your time, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.